And breaking news tonight, after a day of high drama on Capitol Hill, the U.S. House of Representatives approved the controversial debt deal that was announced by President Barack Obama last night at the White House. Now, that means the bill now heads to the U.S. Senate, where a vote is expected at noon on Tuesday. But tonight, the spotlight was on the House, and among the 269 members who voted in support of the measure was none other than Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, who made a surprise return to the floor. Now, this is the first time the Congresswoman visited the Capitol since the tragic shooting that nearly took her life in January of this year. And as you can imagine, she was greeted with a stirring round of applause from both sides of the aisle. Now, that incredible moment of unity in the House was preceded by a day of disagreements as Republicans and Democrats voice serious concerns over this deal on the right. Members from Michelle Bachmann to Senator Tom Coburn have slammed the bill, saying it does nothing to decrease spending, nor does it institute any real long-term reforms. And Congresswoman Bachmann, by the way, will be here later live this hour. Now, meanwhile, on the left, it is a different story, as Democrats are outraged over the fact that the bill does not immediately trigger any new tax hikes on you, the American people. However, this is something that we are keeping a close eye on because it is the belief of many that the bill authorizes a so-called special committee to repeal the Bush tax cuts and also possibly set into motion other so-called revenue enhancers down the road. Joining me now for an exclusive interview, somebody who voted for the compromise, and he is the chairman of the House Budget Committee, Wisconsin Congressman Paul Ryan. Congressman, always good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, you too, Sean. Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
All right, I know it's been a long battle, a difficult process. Why don't you give us your take on it? You voted for it. Why you think this is good for the American people?
Because we're cutting spending. Look, is this everything I want? Of course not. Our budget proposed to cut $6.2 trillion. This cuts $2.1 to $2.4 trillion. First thing we get right off the bat is $1 trillion out of government agency budgets. We actually got discretionary caps in law. I've been fighting for these spending caps ever since the day I came to Congress. We couldn't even get these kinds of spending caps in the Bush administration. This kind of tells you just how far the culture has changed. So we got $2.1 to $2.4 trillion in just spending cuts. The president first started off asking us for a blank check. Then he asked for a big tax increase. He got none of those. And we kept our pledge, which was we will cut more spending than we will raise the debt limit by.
But let me ask you,
that pledge was maintained.
All right. So, but the president's going to get an immediate $1 trillion, or just shy of $1 trillion.
900.
All right, 900 billion in the debt ceiling. And these cuts are going to take place over a 10-year period of time.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
How much are we getting the first year, and how much are we getting the second year? How much is in defense, and how do we hold future Congresses accountable to what you're doing today?
Right. That's a good question. So $21 billion right away for the first fiscal year. Then it's about 46, I think, doing this off the top of my head, for the second fiscal year. How much out of defense in the first fiscal year? It will be $9 billion from what we call the security accounts. That's not just defense, that's all security, homeland security, national security, and then $2 billion to $4 billion the next year. So the cuts on defense were minimized quite a bit by the most recent agreement John Boehner reached. More to the point, how do you bank these cuts? What conservatives like me have been fighting for years are statutory caps on spending, little legal caps in law that says government agencies cannot spend over a set amount of money, and if they breach that amount across the board, sequester comes in to cut that spending, and you can't turn that off without a supermajority vote. We got that in law. That is here. So the best way you can actually bank that $1 trillion spending cut is to have legal caps in law, which we haven't had since the 1990s. We now have them, and then the special committee, is tasked with getting the the $1.1 to $1.5 trillion in cuts. Now, this, I got to tell you, Sean, we're not going to raise taxes in this committee. Number one, we're not going to put the kind of people on this committee.
Are you on this select committee?
I don't know. They haven't been named yet. But we're not going to put the kind of people on this committee that are going to, go for a tax increase. Number one. Number two, it couldn't pass the House even if they tried. Number three, the baseline they use, the measuring stick that they use for this committee, makes it really basically impossible to raise taxes. Because to raise taxes and get credit for it in this committee, you would have to commit a $3.5 trillion tax increase. The Bush tax cuts go away. The alternative minimum tax kicks in. You wouldn't get credit for any of that. And then you'd have to raise taxes on top of that. That's why we think tax increases are non-starter.
I know you know budget numbers better than anybody here. The CBO, though, is scoring this bill to include that the Bush tax cuts expire.
No. The CBO does not. That is not true.
That's
the
not
CBO
true?
does not.
That's what I've been reading all day.
I know. The CBO baseline assumes that.
Well, that's
current
what I mean.
law. So that this bill doesn't address tax policy. This bill cuts spending. This bill is scored as cutting $2.1 to $2.4 trillion in spending. The current law has all the Bush tax cuts going away in 2013, the alternative minimum tax kicking in, the Obamacare tax increases kicking in, and CBO simply in their baseline reflects current law. This doesn't change current law on taxes.
Right.
This changes current law on spending only.